Welcome to Paranormal M, where we bring you the most fascinating and unexplainable stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest paranormal adventures. We hope you enjoy the ride. I want to know if anybody has any idea or has experienced something similar. So for a little context, I stay in central Scotland. I don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal really, despite having these two experiences, and another one which has really affected me, but I still choose to try not to think about what it may have been. These happened probably about 2 or 3 years ago now, so not recent. My friend recently admitted to me that recently he's had something similar happen. Stays 2 doors down from me. So I thought I'd let this sub help us get some peace of mind. The first experience I had was one night when I was home alone and going to sleep. These only happen when I'm home alone. I was disturbed by what sounded like one of my cats scratching at my brother's door. The door was the only one that was open since the cats are in and out all night, but instead of scratching at the carpet like they usually do, it was like they were scratching at the actual door itself with their claws out. Something felt off, so I didn't even make a move. Felt way too heavy to be my cats. Went on for minutes. At this point I was already kind of freaked out, but immediately after stopping I could hear whatever it was darting from my brother's door at the end of the hall to the top of the stairs at the other end over and over again. Anybody who owns a cat knows that they do strange things, like every once in a while, but I knew that this wasn't either of them. Besides the heavy one, both were at the foot of my bed. It sounded like it had a lot of weight, like a large dog almost. It was impossibly fast, changed directions like it was nothing and darted the whole length of the hall in what felt like less than half a second. This went on for a couple of minutes as I started getting more terrified. Eventually it stopped at my door, and that's when I remembered that it was open. My heart honestly nearly burst. I could hear it sort of push my door open with its head, and I could hear this heavy breathing, almost like a human's. That was before it let out a really low-pitched growl and just disappeared. Absolutely nothing else for ages. It messed me up, but I forgot about it and didn't mention it to anybody else. That was until a few weeks ago. I won't detail exactly what happened as it was practically the same, with the exception that I could hear it intact with things on the opposite side of my parents' room over and over at impossible speeds. Once that happened and I decided to tell my friend, that's when he told me his experience. It sends chills down my spine knowing that it isn't just my imagination playing tricks. And I'd like to know if anybody else has had anything similar like this, or any clue of what it could have been. What happened at my now deceased grandparents' farm. Before I start, my father's never been a believer in ghosts, the afterlife, none of it. He lost faith in everything after my grandfather died of cancer. I've played this in my head 1,000,000 times. My dad and I have discussed it more than anything else. This happened roughly 6 months ago. My grandmother had just passed. My father and I, along with the rest of my father's side of the family, came to clean out the farm, divide up their belongings. Most of the family took small things from the kitchen and their old bedrooms, simple things, just to remember them. Small talk here and there, and my aunts and my uncles telling me stories about the things that they were taking. I had a close relationship with my grandma, but never met my grandpa. Keep in mind, never met him. My dad, along with his older brother and myself, went down to the basement to grab the old poker table my grandpa had. Uncle went back upstairs to grab a toolbox to take off some stuff at the walls, and Dad and I are alone. The basement isn't finished. It's all brick walls, and the only lights are Christmas ones strung up just due to the ceiling one breaking, I guess, a few years back. I'm wandering around, and I found shoes in a corner. Without even thinking, I say, "Aren't these the shoes Grandpa was buried in? How'd they get here?" My dad came rushing over, looked at the shoes, and looked at each other. Called my uncle to come look at the shoes. We go by the steps to meet him. The Christmas lights go out, and the lights upstairs go out. Then the door to my grandparents' bedroom, which is right next to the basement door on the first floor, slams shut. Turn my phone flashlight on, try not to lose my mind, run over there where the shoes were. They were gone. We ran up the steps, out the front door into his truck, and we just sit. We both know those shoes were there. Something or someone is in that house. Neither of us believe it's my grandpa. I felt like throwing up. The whole way home, my dad was complaining of a migraine. I was just 3 years old when my grandpa died. The only one who would, know what shoes Grandpa was buried in would be my uncle. And they did confirm to my father, well, those were his shoes. The scariest experience I've had. I want to start off by saying that I was a believer in the paranormal before these experiences, and I've had more than one experience that I can't really explain. But this one is by far the scariest. To give a little bit of background, this was a couple of years ago, shortly after the passing of my partner. We were together almost 10 years, so at this point I was truly at my lowest. I'd seen an article on the internet talking about contacting loved ones on the other side, and before this I would never have even considered trying it. But I turned off all the lights in my room and I lit a candle, just a normal scented one. I didn't have a Ouija board. I was too afraid to go to that extent. And at this point I was kind of skeptical that anything would happen, considering I wasn't following through with exactly how the article had said do it. Once I lit the candle, I called out to my partner, asking if they were there. Nothing happened. The second time I called out, and immediately everything went pitch black. Where I live, there's not many streetlights or anything, so I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. At that moment, I wasn't thinking that the power had went out, but for some reason, I thought I'd left my room completely. I know that doesn't make sense. There was no bad weather that night or high winds. First, I tried to feel for my phone. Couldn't find it, and I jumped up and ran until I hit the wall, feeling the door handle or the light switch. At this point, I just started screaming. Then my mom swung the door open, asking why I was screaming. That it was okay, the power just went out. It took about 10 minutes before the power came back. I know to some this may have been a coincidence, but I truly believe it was paranormal. I had a few experiences after doing this. Even at one point had seen a shadow that looked like my partner sitting in the corner. I will never mess with anything like that again. I may even delete this later, I don't know. I just wanted to hear some thoughts from others. I also want to add, I did mention I had a candle lit, but when it went pitch black, I'm not sure what happened to the candle, or even if it went out or how. I was in such a panic to get out, I don't really recall. I just remember not being able to see anything at all. Haunted by a murder victim, Marie Spanhik. One day, Heidi Herrera was waiting at her doorstep in Chico, California. She was waiting with excitement to meet her best friend Jodie Foster and her 4-year-old daughter Hannah. Jodie was a single mother who was moving to Chico from Montana due to her financial and personal problems. Leaving Hannah in Heidi's house, Jodie started to search for an apartment that would fit into her budget. In her search, Jody stumbled upon Walnut Gardens, an inviting apartment building that was present in the perfect neighborhood to raise her daughter. However, the only available apartment in the building was present on the first floor, and its balcony made Jody extremely anxious. There was a possibility of her daughter falling off of it. Despite her fear, she decided to take the apartment because of two reasons. The first reason was that she couldn't find another apartment in her budget. The second reason was that the building manager promised to give them an apartment on the ground floor as soon as it became available. Beginning of sequential nightmares. The first day at the apartment was hectic for Jody. She had to arrange and organize her things inside it. Thus, Jody and her daughter dozed off earlier than usual. That night, Jody had a dream in which she saw a young couple dressed up in the clothes from like 1970s walking around their locality. It was as if they were hunting someone. Jody constantly kept seeing a weird H symbol in this dream. The couple walked until they reached directly under the balcony of her new apartment, stared at Hannah with evil intent. The moment Jody saw them calling Hannah toward them, she woke up from her dream painting, and the time was exactly 3:37 a.m. The dream seemed to be too vivid, and she immediately called Heidi. Heidi convinced her that she was making it up and asked her to go back to sleep. The next night, Jody had a similar dream, but this time the young couple were walking down the hallway towards her apartment. Jody shut the door of her apartment, but they suddenly appeared inside her apartment and tried to abduct her daughter Hannah. As Jody started screaming at them to stop, she saw Hannah turn into a young woman whom she hadn't seen before. Jody woke up once in a panic. The time was 3:37 a.m. Shifting to another apartment. The next day, the building manager told Jody that a ground floor apartment was open for her to move in. Jody was relieved hearing this and moving into the apartment without a second's thought. As the apartment was extremely dirty, Jody and Heidi decided to clean it before moving Jody's things. While cleaning, Heidi felt an eerie presence inside the apartment. It felt as if somebody invisible was stalking them. Also, Heidi felt extremely cold inside the apartment. Despite the strangeness, she decided not to say anything about it to Jody, and she didn't want to scare her friend. After moving to the apartment, Jody and her daughter started seeing strange things. Jody would find her keys go missing from the key hanger, only to reappear in the middle of her bed. Also, Hannah started seeing a young woman in front of her. Being a 4-year-old kid, she thought it was her mother's friend. That was until she saw a gash on the neck of this young woman. Little did the kid know that the woman she was seeing at the same woman her mom was seeing in her dreams. Eventually, Jody's dreams resumed. Sequential nightmares resume. One night while sleeping in her new apartment, the young couple appeared again in Jody's dream, and this time they were driving a blue car. Jody saw this couple drive up to the young woman she had seen before. They offered her a drive. The couple drove the car into the locality of Jody's apartment and dropped the woman in Jody's apartment building. While the woman was about to go inside, the man asked her if he could use the restroom in her apartment. Jody was shouting in her dream, asking her not to allow him. She wasn't able to hear Jody. Jody immediately woke up from her dream in fear, and the time was 3:37 a.m. yet again. From this night onwards, Jody started trying her best not to sleep, but even her best efforts couldn't stop her from falling asleep. Later one night, Jody saw a man pour some liquid into a piece of cloth, cover this woman's nose and mouth with it until she fell unconscious. The couple then made her look like a drunk college student to avoid suspicion, took her into their car and drove away. Throughout the dream, Jody kept shouting for help, but no one was able to hear her. Eventually, Jody woke up from her dream, and the time, similar to the previous instances, the time was 3:37 a.m. Jody noticed that her dreams were in a sequence, and despite her best efforts, they never stopped. In her next dream, Jody saw the young woman wake up in the back of the car with tied wrists. She started screaming for help. Hearing her scream, the man stopped the car and grabbed a grilled metal helmet. He locked her head in it. The woman looked so scared that her eyes appeared to be in the personification of fear. The couple dragged her into their brick basement and shackled her, already tied wrists to chains over her head, thus putting her in a defenseless position. Jody saw the couple slowly strip off her clothes with force, and the man started forcefully kissing her. The woman put her lipstick on, walked toward the tied woman, and started biting her as she squealed in pain. The kisses slowly turned into sexual abuse. Not being able to witness the torture she was going through, Jody woke up from her dream. The time was 3:37 a.m. Nightmares accompanied by paranormal events. The next night, Jody dreamt about the woman again, and this time she saw her screaming inside a bathroom as a couple held her tight. As the woman pleaded with the couple, asking them to not harm her, the man pulled her head back and cut open her throat with a knife. She was bleeding to death. The woman looked directly at Jody's eyes through the mirror and told her, "Help me." Jody immediately woke up, and just as always, the time was 3:37 a.m. But when she woke up this time, she saw the blinds of the window in her room aggressively go up and down sporadically, and the lights in the apartment started to flicker. The lights kept flickering until they burst and shattered. At this point, Jody started feeling as if she was making things up, and she decided that, she had to have a companion in this house. These strange things would stop, maybe. Thus, she asked a family friend named Misty to babysit her daughter. Misty was an extremely warm person, but she couldn't speak. She had to wait at the doorstep for a brief period of time, for Jody and her daughter weren't in the apartment. The moment Misty stepped into the house after Jody returned, she had a strange feeling of being watched by something invisible. In a few seconds, they heard Hannah's favorite Ernie doll repeat, "I feel great," in its programmed voice. Jody asked her daughter and Misty to step back and walk toward the bedroom following the sound. When she entered the bedroom, she found the Ernie doll on the top of the pile of things, and it had a noose around its neck. This sight terrified Jody. Gathering Misty and Hannah, she rushed out of the apartment. After coming out, Jody called the police asking them for help. But when she told them about the doll, they just ridiculed her and cut the call. With no other option available, they decided to go back into the house and sleep. Thus, after setting the alarm for 5:30, the trio went to bed. Jody woke up in the middle of the night as she felt the apartment shake. The lights started flickering. Things were being thrown around on their own. And to add to the creepiness of the situation, Hannah's Ernie doll started repeating, "I feel great." Overwhelmed by that eeriness, the trio ran out of the house, and Jody was caught off guard when she saw the time on the clock on the hallway wall. The time was 3:37 a.m. Another change of apartment. After Jody complained to the building manager about the strangeness in the apartment, she offered her an apartment in a different building downtown. However, there was one condition. She was asked to not talk about the haunted apartment. Jody immediately agreed and moved out of her apartment in Walnut Grove. After leaving the apartment, Jody's life changed for the good. She found herself a good job and also a good partner named Joel Wiley. She was starting to become financially stable again, and her nightmares stopped as well. Thus, Jody was finally moving on from the traumatic things she experienced in a haunted apartment. However, this did not last long, as her daughter Hannah started seeing the young woman yet again. She started drawing pictures of this woman, and in one of these pictures, she perfectly portrayed the couple abusing the woman after tying her wrists over her head. After seeing the drawings, Jody understood that the spirit from the haunted apartment had followed her. Identity of the woman in Jody's nightmares. After giving a deep thought, Jody told Joel about the things that were happening, and to her surprise, Joel actually believed her. Also, he encouraged Jody to investigate more about the woman. Thus, Joel and Jody started searching for details about this strange woman in Jody's dreams. And after the couple spent multiple hours in the library, they found an article about a young woman named Marie Spanhake. They went missing in 1976. The address mentioned in the flyer of Marie was the address of Jody's old apartment. As they kept reading, they found a photo of Marie, and looking at this photo, Jody was dumbstruck as Marie was the woman she was seeing in her nightmares. Following this discovery, Jody's dreams about Marie returned. The discovery. Eventually, Jody reached out to a local crime journalist named Roger, shared with him the events that she'd been seeing in her dreams about Marie. After listening to her story, Roger told her about a similar case where a couple named Cameron and Janice kidnapped a young woman named Colleen in Red Bluff. The couple imprisoned her into a coffin underneath their bed, used her to attain sexual gratification. Ew. Colleen had endured the abuse for 7 long years before getting rescued by the police. When Roger showed Jody the photo of Cameron and Janice, she confirmed that they were the couple she was seeing in her nightmares. Also, Jody got to know that Janice had testified against her husband, during which she mentioned abducting and killing another woman a year before they abducted Colleen, and her name was Marie Spanhake. Marie's body, however, was never found. On Joel's suggestion, Jody called the police to tell them about the details that she knew about Marie's disappearance. The detective on the call was surprised by Jody's call, as they were about to work on Marie's case that day. After interviewing her for multiple hours, the police were stunned by the details that she had on the case, but because of the lack of strong evidence, they couldn't do much with the information. Validation of Jody's claims about her nightmares. Seeking validation, Jody reached out to a local investigative reporter named Meredith, told her about the details that she knew about Marie's disappearance. Although skeptical, Meredith agreed to investigate the case. To confirm that Jody's claims were true, she had to find one detail shared by Jody that was not released to the public by the police. Thus, with the permission of the police, she started checking Janice's interrogation tape from the Chico Police's missing people's files. In her statement, Janice revealed how her husband killed Marie. According to Janice, as Marie kept shouting while they abused her, Cameron decided to cut her vocal cords to stop her screams. Thus, he pulled back her head and started cutting her neck with a knife. But this caused profuse bleeding and Marie died. The detail about how Marie was killed was not shared with the public by the police. Hence, Meredith understood that Jody's claims were indeed true. After this, Jody stopped getting dreams about Marie, and the paranormal events that occurred in her house stopped. Brutal. Sorry if that was too much for anybody. I did not know. Brutal. A demon in the house. After securing a job that offered a great salary, a war veteran named Gary Hodges had moved to Lawton, Oklahoma, along with his family. Since they hadn't spent much time with Gary the past few years because of him being in the military, Gary's brothers Kevin and Wesley were excited about this. They'd be able to live with their brothers yet again. Thus, in 2009, Gary started to search for a house that would be big enough for his family, which was made up of Gary himself, his girlfriend Heather, Heather's daughter Caitlin, Kevin, Wesley, and Wesley's girlfriend Sabrina. In his search, he found a house with enough space for his family, which was present in the middle of a picture-perfect neighborhood. When he reached the doorstep of this house, he was greeted by its previous tenant who had cut his lease period short. When Gary asked him why he was suddenly breaking his lease, his hands started to tremble. He started beating around the bush. The man told Gary that he felt that he had spent enough time in the house, that it was the reason behind him breaking the lease period. Gary, who had spent more than 2 years in the war zone before, understood that man was lying at the very moment. But the size of the house and the cost of its lease were too inviting for him. Thus, he decided to take a look around the house before making a decision. When Gary asked the previous tenant if he could walk around the house, he immediately agreed. Still, when Gary entered the house, he noticed that the previous tenant was too hesitant to accompany him. In fact, he never entered the house. Thus, Gary entered the house all alone. The moment he stepped into the house, he started feeling a strange sense of oddity inside it. As he walked through the house, he noticed that all the lights in the house, including the lights in the closet, were turned on. This was really strange, as it was just afternoon and the house was well lit by the sunlight coming from outside. Despite the strangeness, Gary decided to leave this house. When he told the previous tenant about this, he immediately took 2 trash bags filled with his belongings, drove away from the house. It appeared as if he fled from the house, but this didn't change Gary's decision and the family ended up moving into there. The first night of creepiness. 2 weeks after moving in, while the family, excluding Caitlin, was sitting in the hall watching TV one night, they heard the sound of heavy marching footsteps coming from the floor above them. Gary, being the eldest member, decided to go upstairs, check what was causing this sound. He initially thought it was Caitlin, who was walking around, but when he checked her room, he found her sound asleep. The sound, which had stopped by then, resumed all of a sudden, but now it seemed to be coming from his bedroom. Gary thought he had an intruder, burst into the room only to find no one inside. Not being able to come up with a logical explanation, Gary concluded that he was making things up. Later that night, while Gary and Heather were getting ready to sleep in their bedroom, Heather got into bed after turning off the lights in the room and the closet. Seconds later, she noticed that the closet light was turned on again. When she told Gary about it, he told her that she might have forgotten to turn off the closet light. Although Heather was pretty sure about turning the closet light, she got out of bed, turned it off again before going to sleep. Gary woke up in the middle of that night with the feeling of being watched. When he opened his eyes, he saw the closet door was open and the light was turned on. He immediately woke Heather up and showed it to her, hoping to get a rational explanation. But even she couldn't come up with one. Gary concluded that his brother was playing a prank on him, confronted them the next day. His brothers told him that they weren't behind the event of the previous night and suggested that it could just be a faulty wire line. Gary didn't believe them, stormed out of the place. A strange shadow inside the closet. A couple of nights later, Gary woke up in the middle of the night as he felt Heather's side of the bed slowly pressed down. As if somebody was sitting on it. Coincidentally, Heather felt it as well. The couple jumped off their bed, turned on the lights, but found no one else in the room. Gary thought that his brothers were playing a prank on them and bolted out of the room to confront them. But he found them sound asleep in their bedrooms. He returned back to his room completely confused and sat up in the bed with Heather, trying to come up with a logical explanation. As the couple was trying to rationalize what had just happened, they saw the light in the closet turn on its own. And through its grilled door, they saw a huge shadow move around the closet. Gary slowly walked toward the closet, opened its doors only to find no one inside. The couple understood that something was wrong with the room. They decided to sleep in the hall that night. While they were almost asleep after sitting down on the couch, they heard glass shatter on the hallway floor. When they walked toward the hallway to investigate, they found a drinking glass shattered on the floor with the nearest table present multiple feet away. It appeared as if the glass flew from the table and hit the floor. These events made Gary believe that something paranormal was happening in the house. Gary became grumpy after that night because of his lack of sleep. His brothers felt as if he was just being overreactive. This led to a heated argument in the dining room one night, and during the argument, the family saw glass fly off a table in the kitchen and shatter on the floor. Seeing this happen right in front of their eyes, Kevin and Wesley started believing their brother's claims. Although the family wanted to move out of the house at once, they couldn't do it because of lack of finances. Zozo. A couple of days later, while the family were sitting in the hall watching TV, I guess they just heard this thumping footstep on the floor above them. Although creeped out, they decided to go upstairs together, check out what it was. But despite completely checking the first floor, they found no one. Making sure the first floor was empty, they walked back to the hall. The moment they got back to the ground floor, they noticed that all the cabinets and drawers were open. Whatever that had opened them opened the refrigerator and the oven in the kitchen as well. That night, while Gary was taking a shower, he heard loud thumping footsteps on the ceiling above him. Hearing these footsteps, Heather rushed into the bathroom to make sure her husband was safe. But the moment she stepped in, Gary felt an extreme burning sensation. 3 deep claw marks just slowly appeared in his back. The couple rushed out of the washroom in fear, and the footsteps stopped. The very same night, while trying to sleep, Kevin heard somebody climb on the stairs, walk up to the door of his room. Once the footsteps reached his door, they abruptly stopped. Kevin got down from his bed and opened his door, anticipating one of the family members to be there. There was no one outside the door. Kevin thought he was just making it up and went back to his bed to sleep. Moments later, he heard eerie dragging sounds around him. When he opened his eyes to investigate, he saw a demonic figure crawl toward him. Kevin shouted in fear, and the demonic figure magically just disappeared. He immediately ran downstairs toward Gary and started crying in fear. Seeing the terror on Nelson's face, Gary and Wesley decided to investigate his room. Thus, grabbing a knife, they walked into Nelson's room, but except the flickering lights, they found nothing. Gary grabbed a couple of pillows and a blanket for his brother and started walking back to the hall. On his way back, he heard footsteps in Caitlin's room. He broke into the room. Just as always, Gary was finding nothing inside. While he was about to walk out, he heard a tapping sound coming from the covered window. When he slowly pulled off the curtain to see who was tapping, he noticed the word Zozo on the window. It was present on the outside of the window pane. A Ouija board seance, or Ouija, Gary searched the internet, and he discovered the word Zozo. Zozo is a demon that has a reputation for bringing bad intentions, bad luck, death, suicide, and much more. The Zozo demon is mainly associated with Ouija boards. After getting to know these details, Gary and his brothers decided to make their own Ouija board and communicate with the demon haunting them. Using a shot glass as a planchette, the family started the seance. When Gary asked, "Is anybody there?" They didn't get any answer, but a couple of minutes later the family felt a breeze hit them, and the shot glass moved to yes, then to no, then back to yes. The cycle continued, and the shot glass moved back and forth until Sabrina asked, "What is your name?" The moment she finished her question, the shot glass moved to the letter Z, then to the letter O, and back to the letter Z, continuously, just spelling zo, 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 zo multiple times. Knowing that they were communicating with the demon in their house, Gary asked, "What do you want?" The very next moment, the shot glass moved around the board, spelling out, "Kill Gary." As the family looked at each other in shock, they started hearing thumping footsteps on the floor above them. The shot glass they were using as the planchette flew off the board and fell on the floor, thus shattering into pieces. The chairs around them started turning over, and Heather, feeling that she had seen enough, lifted her handmade board off the table. The moment she did it, the paranormal events around them stopped. The family ended up burning the board in fear. The final encounter. After the seance, the family didn't really notice anything paranormal for about a week. Their happiness slowly returned, but this did not last long. One day, all of a sudden, the family heard loud footsteps coming from the floors above them. The brothers decided to walk upstairs and check what was causing the sound. As they walked upstairs, they noticed that the sound was coming from Gary's bedroom, and thus, they walked towards his room. The door of the room was slightly open. They cautiously peeked through the opening. What they saw completely freaked them out. They saw a huge demonic figure with a bull-like head aggressively walk around the room. The demonic figure suddenly stopped, slowly turned its head toward the peeking brothers and started running toward them. Completely petrified, the brothers ran downstairs to save themselves. Gary's fright slowly turned into rage, and he ended up confronting the demon. He shouted, "I'm not scared of you. Come now if you can." After hearing this, the demon slowly descended the staircase. As the footsteps slowly approached them, the door around the family started shutting and close. The family found themselves locked in the hall. When the demon finally descended into the hall, Gary shouted, "Get out of here!" Hearing this, the demon looked dead at the family, gave a deafening growl. The growl was so loud that the glass objects around them shattered. These shattered pieces of glass slowly gathered into one shimmering cloud that was floating in midair. The shattered pieces suddenly flew toward the family. Luckily, the family were able to duck down in time and they weren't hurt. They gathered themselves up and looked for the demon, but it had already disappeared. The family ended up moving out of this house shortly after this event. Yeah, a minotaur would probably make me move. Probably. Maybe not. A demon house in Springfield, Louisiana. After living with her parents for a really long time because of financial issues, Janine and her husband AJ finally decided to move out of their house in Springfield, Louisiana. The couple set out on a search to find a house that they would be able to purchase with the money that they had saved. In their search, they found a house that met all their requirements. The house had a pretty much perfect floor plan, and it was located in Springfield as well. Also, since it was a foreclosed house, its price was much lower than its market value. The house, however, had one major downside. As it had remained closed for quite some time, the family had to do some work before they could move into it. But despite this one downside, the couple ended up buying the house. Also, AJ bought a camper van along with the house for the family to stay in during the renovation of their new house. Thus, in September of 2013, Janine, AJ, and their two sons, Hunter and Gage, moved to their new property without knowing that their dream house would turn out to be their worst nightmare. A benign beginning of the paranormal. A couple of days after moving in, AJ out of work, Janine decided to paint their new house. While she was painting one of the rooms while listening to her favorite song on the radio suddenly stopped playing. When Janine walked toward the radio to check what was wrong, she noticed that the radio was turned off. This confused Janine as to, why it turned off this radio. You had to push a button, but Janine was the only one in the house. She had not pushed this button, and although confused, she turned on the radio again, went back to paint only for the radio to turn off yet again. This completely freaked Janine out, and being a woman with heart issues who had a major reliance on medications, the fear almost killed her. Almost a month after they moved in, the couple decided to throw a birthday party in their house for Gage's birthday. When Janine's mother, Beverly, came to the house to help with the decorations. Realizing that she had forgotten to get soda cans for the party, Janine left for the store, leaving Beverly all alone in the house. As Beverly continued her decorating, she just started hearing faint sounds, as if somebody invisible was moving around her. Beverly didn't think too much about these sounds initially, but the moment she saw someone stand behind her in her peripheral, she fled out of the house in fear. When Janine returned, she saw her mother stand out in front of the house, and her body language indicated that she was extremely terrified. When Janine asked her what happened, she told her that somebody else was in the house with a worried face. Janine had not seen her mother that petrified before. She walked into the house to investigate, but she didn't find anything that justified her mother's claims. When she told AJ about this, he just blamed it on her mother's habit of watching too many horror movies. The first violent attack. One night when Janine was all alone in the house washing the dishes, she felt a breeze of cold air suddenly hitting her neck. The windows around her were completely shut, and she didn't understand from which the opening breeze came. Although the strangeness got on her nerves, she continued washing the dishes. A couple of minutes later, she felt something poke her hard, caused her to drop the dish she was holding in her hand. When she turned around to see who it was, she found no one. This petrified Janine, and her heart started racing. As Janine stood near the washing basin trying to gather herself up, she felt somebody pull her hair very hard. There was no one around her. She immediately sprinted out of the house in fear, entered the camper van parked outside, and shut its door closed. It was then that she noticed that she had left her heart medication back in the house. With her heart racing and her consciousness slowly fading, she ran back into the house to take her medicines. Luckily, she was not confronted by anything while she was taking her meds. The moment she swallowed her pills, she rushed back to the camper van. When AJ returned, Janine told him what happened, but he thought that she was making it up as she was alone in a very large old house. It was pretty new for her. An invisible friend. A few days later, when Janine was folding clothes in her room, she heard Hunter talking to somebody in his room. That day, the only ones in the house were Janine, Gage, and Hunter. With Gage playing outside, Janine didn't understand to whom Hunter was speaking. Thus, to get an answer, she slowly tiptoed toward Hunter's room, asked him who he was talking to. Hunter was talking to an empty space until Janine, said he was talking to his friend. Saying this, he started staring back at the empty space and gestured as if he was listening to this quote-unquote friend. When Janine asked him what his friend told him, Hunter told his mom that the friend said that he would hurt Janine if Hunter didn't befriend him. Janine fell short of breath hearing this, but with her best efforts she controlled her fear and walked back to her room without letting her son know she was scared. AJ validates. With winter approaching, Janine called her father Jeff to help her. She needed help taking the winter clothes out of the attic. The moment Jeff entered the house, Janine told her about the strange things happening in the house, but her skeptical father didn't believe her. As Jeff walked back from the attic with her winter clothes, he noticed that the rosary on the door handle beside Janine was swaying like a pendulum. When he leaned in, took a closer look, the rosemary abruptly stopped. As Jeff stood there trying to come up with an explanation, he started hearing heavy stomping sounds come from the attic above him. Jeff initially thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, but when he saw the fear in the eyes of his daughter, he understood that it was not just him hearing the sound. The stomping caused pictures to fall off the walls and plaster fell off the ceiling like raindrops. Jeff snapped and shouted, "Show yourself!" In anger, caused the stomping to stop, and the house was filled with an eerie silence. The very next moment, Janine felt intense burning on her back. She felt as if something was burning her from the inside. Seeing his daughter point to her back while suffering in pain, Jeff slightly pulled up her shirt. As he kept pulling up, his face grew pale because of what he saw. He saw 3 deep claw marks on his daughter's back, causing her a lot of pain. Worried about her kids' safety, Janine sent them to stay with their grandparents for a couple of days. When AJ returned home, Janine showed him the scratch marks on her back, but he concluded that Janine must have brushed against nails while working in the house. This led to an argument between the couple. As they kept arguing, the door near AJ opened on its own and shut closed. This completely freaked him out and started believing his wife's claims. AJ and Janine decided that hanging religious relics around the house would stop the paranormal activity in it. Thus, AJ went around the house hanging crucifixes while Janine followed him with the open Bible in her hand. When AJ was hanging a crucifix on the kitchen door, Janine placed her Bible on the kitchen table and went to hold the ladder AJ was standing on. The moment AJ got down from the ladder after hanging the crucifix, the kitchen lights went out, and he started hearing a cackling sound behind him. When he turned to see what was causing the sound, he saw Janine's open Bible vibrate on the kitchen table. Then vibration kept getting stronger with every passing second. Within a minute, the Bible levitated above the table and closed. Hearing the Bible slam, the couple rushed out of the house in horror. The couple started staying in their camper van after this incident, feared getting back into the house. She will die. A couple of days later, the boys back from their grandparents' house. Janine decided to put a cassette recorder on the kitchen table with the hopes of picking something useful. Thus, after locking her boys inside the camper van, Janine mustered all of her courage, ran into the house, placed the recorder on the kitchen table, and rushed back out. Almost half an hour later, she ran back into the house and retrieved the recorder. The recorder was silent for quite some time, but a low demonic growl followed this silence. All of a sudden, she heard this demonic voice say, "She will die." Janine finally understood what the dark entity in her house wanted. It wanted her life. A huge pentagram on the floor. A week after this incident, one afternoon, Janine was hanging the washed clothes on a clothesline. Her sons were playing on the porch. Noticing that the voice of her son was slowly moving away from her, Janine turned toward the porch to see what they were doing. Seeing her sons run into the house, she started shouting at them, asking them to stop. They just wouldn't listen. Although scared to get back into the house, she just went in looking for her sons. Their voice led her into one of the upstairs bedrooms. When she entered the bedroom, she found no one. Before she could leave the room, she felt something invisible hold her firmly in place. This invisible entity lifted her off the floor, threw her back to the floor, face first, pinned her down. Janine felt as if something extremely heavy was lying down on her with her hands holding hers. It was making it hard for her to breathe. The demonic voice whispered, "Look under," in Janine's ears. With a lot of effort, she ripped a corner of the carpet under her and tore it off. The moment she did it, the entity pinning her down released her. When Janine got back on her feet and looked at what was under the carpet, she ran out of the house as she felt something dark take control of her. When she finally exited the house, she saw AJ and the boys near the camper van. She ran towards AJ and asked him to go to the bedroom upstairs and take a look. AJ calmed her down, gave her heart medications, and walked her to the bedroom didn't walk her, but he walked to the bedroom that his wife told him to. He noticed that a piece of the carpet was torn off and the bare wooden flooring that was left behind had satanic symbols carved into it. He immediately tore the rest of the carpet, and underneath it was a large pentagram with satanic symbols encircling it. It appeared as if somebody had summoned a demon into this bedroom. AJ immediately ran out of the house and called the local minister, asking him for help. The possession. The minister was able to sense the evil in the house the moment he arrived. With AJ and Janine accompanying him, the minister went around the house reciting the verses in the Bible and sprinkling holy water. As he was cleansing the house, Janine started to feel sick. Her heart started to race. AJ took her aside and made her sit down on a chair and went back to help the minister. Janine felt her chest tighten up and she started failing short of breath. Janine felt darkness slowly take control of her. She eventually backed out. About an hour later, after the minister finished the cleansing, AJ checked on Janine. She looked completely worn out. AJ decided to take her to her parents' house. He helped her get into a car and started driving. And on their way, AJ asked Janine how she was doing. She would just not even reply. This made AJ mad. He asked her the same question authoritatively. The moment he finished asking it, Janine swiftly lifted her head and started looking dead at him. AJ saw her eyes turn black. With a deep demonic voice, she said, "I'm fine." AJ understood that his wife was possessed. He started driving as fast as he could. The Exorcism. Janine's parents were waiting at the doorstep for them to arrive. The moment they reached their house, Janine was taken inside, and the minister was called. Jeff noticed that despite her body being really cold, her pulse seemed to be fine. When Beverly asked her what was wrong, Janine's eyes turned black yet again. And just like before, she said, "I'm fine," in a demonic voice. The family decided to read Bible verses until the minister's arrival. And while they read the verses, Janine suddenly came back to her senses and told the family that a demon was inside her. When the minister finally arrived, he immediately noticed that the demon was indeed inside Janine herself. With AJ and Jeff holding her down, the minister started performing an exorcism. Janine started shaking violently. Her eyes turned black again. She started making demonic growls. The minister putting a cross on her head with holy oil and her family members calling out her name. Janine's eyes slowly became normal again. She came back to her senses. Janine was finally free of the demon. The couple ended up moving out of the house with their sons in January of 2014. That's not something you'd like to find underneath your old carpet. A haunted mansion in Mansfield. In 1994, a newly divorced woman named Amy Moore was on her search for a new house in Mansfield. In her search, she found an abandoned house that, in her eyes, looked extremely beautiful. This house looked like it needed a lot of work before she could move in with her daughter, Alyssa, but this was the factor that made Amy fall in love with the house. She was an artistic woman, and according to her, this house was her paintboard. Luckily, this house was available to be sold at an auction. Wanting a detailed look at it before bidding, she reached out to the property manager who showed up at the house the next day. The walkthrough started with the basement, and inside the middle of it, Amy found a mysterious concrete stone that seemed to hold no meaning. The property manager showed her the remainder of the house, and Amy noticed that the house was in complete disarray. After showing the remaining portions of the house, the property manager took Amy to the third floor. The floor of this room was filled with the remains of dead rodents, with old things that belonged to the hospital just strewn all over the place. The room was in complete chaos. Amy found an old eroding board that read Mansfield Training School. And this made her question the history of the house. The property manager was clueless about it and told her that the property's records were lost. Without giving much thought to it, Amy put forth a strong bid and purchased the house. Since Amy was doing a day job, she started renovating the house at night all by herself. One night while Amy was removing old wallpaper near the ceiling, she accidentally cut herself and started bleeding. The moment her blood fell on the floor, she was knocked off the stepladder by something invisible. As she lay down on the floor in shock, she heard someone heavy run around her, but she couldn't see anybody. Amy immediately ran out of the house in fear, got into her vehicle, and fled the place. She returned to the house the next morning, but despite doing a thorough check, she didn't find anything strange in the house. Amy and Alyssa move inside. 1 month later, with the renovations complete, Amy and Alyssa moved into their new house. Although Amy was exhilarated to move in, her daughter was not particularly excited as she was able to feel something dark in the house that creeped her out. To overcome this fear, she decided to explore the house. While moving around the house, she noticed that the staircase to the third floor was covered with a creepy old door. After looking at this door, Alyssa's mind was filled with mixed emotions. She was scared of this door, but at the same time she was curious about what lay behind it. Thus, gathering all of her courage, she unlatched this door and opened it. The moment she opened this door, a blast of cold wind hit her, made her fall short of breath. However, this did not stop Alyssa from ascending the staircase and going to the 3rd floor. As she walked around soaking the creepiness in, she felt as if something was standing behind her. Before she could turn and see what it was, she felt its breath on her neck. Fear took over Alyssa's mind and she ended up running out of the house. A few weeks later, while Amy was making dinner and talking to her daughter about how the day went, she heard heavy stomping coming from the floor above them. It was vibrating the ceiling above them. Amy grabbed a hammer and walked slowly upstairs to investigate with her daughter closely following behind her. When she almost reached the floor above, the door in front of her shut close, and this made Alyssa run out of the house in fear. Amy, however, ran toward the door and opened it, hoping to find an explanation, but she found nothing inside the room. Alyssa moves out. The stomping grew worse with time, and every time Amy tried investigating, she would find nothing. Also, the creepy door that covered the staircase to the 3rd floor started acting strange. Despite closing it herself, Amy would always find it open whenever she passed near it. Thus, one day she placed an iron rod on the latch to stop it from opening, but just after taking a few steps away from the door, she heard the iron rod fly off the latch. The very next moment, she heard the door slowly open with a creak, and this made Amy run out of the house. One rainy night, Alyssa heard loud sexual moans come from her mother's room. The moans were so loud that the sound of rain coming from outside seemed to be soft. With moans getting progressively louder every minute, she decided to go tell her mom to reduce her sound. Okay. Alyssa kept knocking on the door of her mother's room, but she got no response. As she kept knocking, she remembered seeing her mom leave for work in the morning. Realizing that, well, the one making the moans was not her mom, she slowly started stepping back. A couple of seconds later, she heard the creepy door that led to the 3rd floor open behind her. This made her run away from the place only to collide with her mother who was returning to the house. With the creepiness in the house steadily growing, Alyssa eventually moved out of the house to stay with her boyfriend. This left Amy all alone in the house. Dave's short tenure. Later, Amy got to know one of her friends named Dave was looking for a house to rent. With more than a couple of empty bedrooms in the house, she decided to rent to her friend. Dave was a police detective who was going through a divorce. Amy warned him about the sounds in the house, but he didn't take it seriously. One night while Dave was watching TV and having dinner in his room, he heard the floorboard creak as if someone heavy was standing over it. When he slowly peeked out of the room to see who it was, he saw a huge shadow dart past his room. Thinking it was an intruder, Dave drew his gun, started investigating. After not finding anybody despite checking completely, he went back to his room to continue his dinner. While Dave was taking the dishes to the kitchen after completing his dinner, a huge dark shadow appeared right in front of him and vanished magically, terrorizing the baby. A couple of nights later, while Dave was watching TV in his room, he heard a water bottle crash down onto the floor. While he got down from his bed and started walking toward the door to see who threw it, the bottle came flying towards his head. Luckily, Dave ducked in time and he was not hurt by this bottle. As he stood there in shock, recollecting what had just happened, he heard a loud demonic growl approach him from the hallway. He moved across his room, entered the closet, and disappeared. This instant made Dave move out of the house. Shortly after Dave moved out, Amy's son Bill, who was recently laid off, his fiancée Casey, and their infant son Bubba moved in with her. One night, leaving Bubba in his crib, with the baby monitor beside him, Casey and Bill went downstairs. As they kept speaking to each other, they heard "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" on the monitor with them. Bubba still seemed to be asleep, and the couple thought that it was one of his toys malfunctioning. But the song suddenly stopped, and they heard a demonic voice say, "Bubba." The very next moment, the infant started shouting and crying. The couple immediately rushed to his crib, but they found no one around it. The history behind the mansion. Following this event, the family started getting nightmares every night. Amy constantly dreamt of being a young girl. The young girl was abused by a creepy-looking woman who abused and murdered her. With this dream repeating every night, Amy understood that her dream was somehow connected to the house. Thus, to find the connection it had with her dreams, she started taking pictures of the interior of the house, but it seemed to be a really hard puzzle to crack. One day, while Amy was sitting in the local pub with these pictures on the table, one of her old friends ran into her. Seeing the picture on the table, he immediately asked Amy if the house in it belonged to her. When she told him yes, he told her that that house used to be a mental asylum. It was known for abusing its patients. Amy finally found a clue. With the help of Casey, she started digging into the history of the house. Through her research, she came to know that the house was previously called the House of Imbeciles, and a young girl was raped and murdered in this house. Also, the face of this girl was the same as the girl Amy was seeing in her dreams. With curiosity taking over, Amy decided to open the weird concrete structure in the basement. When she opened it with the help of her son, she found partially cremated human body parts in it. Despite all of this creepiness, Amy continues to live in this haunted mansion. Haunted by an impersonating demon. After getting married in 1999, Mike and Stacy Stow were living the life that they'd always dreamed of. The couple had their first son, Cameron, in 2002. And with Stacy pregnant, they were expecting their daughter in 2004. A terrible vision. Mike was an easygoing man who was a great husband and a perfect father. One day in 2004, while the couple was playing on the lawn, they were playing with their son, Mike, and Stacy suddenly had an eerie vision out of the blue. In her vision, she saw her husband die in a car accident. Tears started rolling out of Stacy's eyes, and she was brought back to her senses by Mike. The next moment, Mike received a call asking him to come to work as there was an emergency. Mike, who had just started his new job as an IT manager, obliged, left for his workplace driving his car. A couple of hours later, Stacy heard a police officer knock on her door. Stacy, who was still trying to shake off that eerie vision, heard something terrible from the police officer. Her vision had become true, and her husband had died in a car crash. Stacy was devastated hearing this news, and her perfect life fell apart. Unlike most widows, Stacy continued living in the same house even after her husband's death. According to her, staying in this house made her feel like Mike was constantly around her. She eventually gave birth to her daughter and nicknamed her Brian. After Mike's death, Stacy remained single, and she continued to take good care of her kids. Is that Mike? Almost 9 years after Mike's death, strange things started happening in the house of the Stows. One afternoon, while Stacy was cleaning the house after sending Brian and Cameron to school, she noticed a small glass teddy bear magically appear on the table before her. It seemed to hold a heart in its hand, and inside this heart was an orange stone. Since it was Mike's birthstone, Stacy concluded that it was her husband trying to tell her that he was watching over them, but she couldn't have been more wrong. The next day, when 12-year-old Cameron was playing in the living room, the temperature of the living room started to increase all of a sudden. Noticing this change, Cameron turned around to see what was the reason behind this sudden increase in temperature. Saw a fire in the fireplace. He put down the fire and continued playing, only for the temperature to rise again. Discovering that the igniter in the fireplace had turned on by itself, Cameron started shouting for his mom in fear. Before Stacy reached the living room, the igniter turned off by itself. This made her believe that her son was making it up. While Stacy was about to leave the room after sending her son away, she saw the glass teddy bear that she had seen earlier that magically appeared on the table in front of her. Stacy had placed it in her closet the previous time, and she couldn't come up with an explanation for how it moved to the table before her. She concluded that her husband was playing a prank to light up the family's mood. Later that night, Stacy was woken up from her sleep by soft whispers. The whispers were in the voice of her late husband, and it said, "Honey, I'm here." Stacy was creeped out by this. Mustering all of her courage, she turned around to see who it was. When she turned, she saw an indentation on her bed. It seemed to be that of a man. Stacy jumped out of her bed, but in fear, but thinking that it was the spirit of her husband, she lay beside this indentation and peacefully slept. A black figure with cat-like eyes. A couple of nights later, 9-year-old Brian had an eerie, vivid nightmare, made her run to her mother's room in fear. In her nightmare, she found herself being chased by a 6-foot-tall, large black figure that had cat-like eyes. This figure chased her down, got hold of her ankles, and pulled her along the hallway into a dark corner. This made Brian wake her up from her sleep. She ran to Stacy's room with tears rolling from her eyes. When Brian told her what had just happened to Stacy, she convinced her daughter that it was just a nightmare and to put her back to sleep. The next day, while Brian was all around her room painting, she felt as if somebody was walking into the room. When she turned around to see who it was, she saw a tall man with blue eyes and brown hair walking towards her. This man was her father, Mike, whom she'd only seen in pictures. Seeing Mike open up his arms, the kid screamed in joy and ran toward him. As she got closer and closer, she noticed that her father's face was turning black. Mike slowly changed into the demon that she'd seen in her dreams the previous night. It made her bolt out of the room in fear. Brian ran straight to her room and told her about what she saw in the figures. Her father's face, like slowly changing to this black figure with cat eyes. After Stacy heard her daughter say this, she started asking herself if the presence she was feeling around her was really the presence of her husband. Seeing her daughter getting scared while being alone, Stacy decided to have Brian sleep with her for a few days. That night, Cameron left his room, walked into the kitchen to fulfill his midnight cravings. While he was snacking in the kitchen, he started hearing nonsensical whispers around him. The whispers didn't seem to have a defined origin, and they started feeling like an evil presence around him, and he slowly started backstepping out of the kitchen. When he was almost out, he felt something stand right behind him. When he turned to see what it was, he saw a huge black figure with cat-like eyes staring dead at him. Cameron fell on the floor in fear of this figure disappearing. Cameron ran upstairs to his mother's room and told her about what he'd seen in the kitchen. Seeing the paleness on his face and the tears in his eyes, Stacy confirmed that her son was not lying. Also, with the entity that he had seen being the same as the entity Brian had seen, Stacy understood that their house was haunted by something evil. Stacy reached out to a spiritual cleanser named Johnny, seeking help. When Johnny entered their house, he started to feel something demonic in it. He told the family that he had to cleanse the house, and started the cleansing ritual. While Johnny was cleansing the house, Brian felt something grip her ankle hard. Before she could call her mom, the demon started pulling her into the hallway by her ankle. Johnny followed her, shouting, "Begone!" He did this repeatedly and eventually left her ankle. Brian felt the darkness around her slowly dissipate. She was relieved by it. Johnny told the family that the demon was no longer in their house and left the house. The evil returns. Almost a year later, with the family slowly recovering from the horror that they had been through, demonic activity returned to the house. One night, while Brian was getting ready to go to sleep, She started hearing whispers around her. The whispers said, "Help me, let me out." Scared to death, Brian covered her face with a blanket. The blanket was forcefully pulled off of her, and in front of her stood the black figure with cat eyes she had seen before. The demon disappeared. She started feeling a sharp pain on the right side of her chest. Brian bolted out of the room and ran to her mom, crying in pain. She told Stacy what had happened, but her mother didn't seem to believe her. Seeing a bloody patch develop on Brian's top, Stacy lifted it, and underneath it was Brian's bare chest with 3 deep and freshly made marks. This made Stacy believe that the demon had indeed returned. She reached out to a psychic medium named Claudia, seeking her help. The starting point. Claudia visited their house the very next day. The moment she stepped into the house, similar to Johnny, she felt something evil in it. After patiently listening to the experiences of the family members, Claudia tried to find a reason behind them. Using her psychic powers, Claudia figured out that Stacy's nephews, who took care of the house while the family left for a vacation, had performed a seance in the kitchen of the house trying to communicate with Mike. During the seance, they encountered a demon which made them run out of the room without finishing the seance properly. After Stacy confirmed that strangeness in the house began after this vacation, Claudia helped the family to finish the seance properly. Ever since then, they haven't experienced anything paranormal in their house. Cheers. My grandpa contacted me the day that he died. My grandpa was diagnosed with cancer about 3 years ago. The doctor said that he wouldn't make it much longer, so I decided to move in with my grandparents to help care for him. My grandma is disabled, so couldn't do it on her own. He ended up living for 2 years after his initial diagnosis. During this time, he and I got very close. He'd always told me I was his favorite, but this was a lot different. I talked about death and the afterlife a lot, and he was aware of my skepticism. One day he told me he would send me a sign if there's something out there. Anyways, fast forward to his last few days. He was losing his mind more and more every day. He was even convinced he was already dead at one point. I was the last person he talked to before he went into a comatose-like state. He told me that he loved me so much. The next day he died in our living room. It was really surreal. I kind of blocked everything out because I'd never been so close to death. We had to wait for the hospice nurse to pronounce him dead, and then for the coroners to pick him up. He lay there for like 5 hours before the nurse showed up. I never moved from his side. After the coroners came, I gave his body a kiss, told him I loved him, and went upstairs because I didn't want to see them put him in a body bag or something. When I got up to my room, I just sat in my bed in a weird daze. I have this touch-activated light on my desk. It's on the other side of my room. It turned on by itself. I didn't think anything about it at first, so I went and turned it off and returned to my bed. Then it turned on again. Turned it off again, sat in bed again, and then again, 3 times on its own. The last time I got up to turn it off, it connected. Connection was made in my mind. The mirror sits on a leather box my grandpa gave me. It had all this sort of cufflinks and miscellaneous sentimental items in it. I am by no means spiritual or religious, so this experience has left me confused for at least over a year. I want to believe that this was him sending me a message, but it contradicts everything that I've ever believed in. Is this most likely just not a coincidence, or is it possible that he tried to contact me? I vote for the latter. See ya.